Over 10 years of it being absent from my collection, I finally got my hands on the Nocturne set again. And for 15 bucks, if you can imagine. Now, it was missing the tentacle piece, but that did give me a good opportunity to use these bootleg air katanas here, which are just lovely pieces in general. But this video is not about Nocturne specifically. Actually, it's about the context with which we judge the sets that we're looking at. I can remember back in the early and mid 2000s when I was perusing every possible form I could get my hands on to look at reviews because I needed somebody else to tell me if the set was good before I was going to buy it. That'll be important later. That said, though, what I find fascinating is that this set, among many of the others in 2007, introduced a lot of recolors. And a notable recolor from this set that's going to be a little bit more important is this headpiece right here, because it comes in 3 different colors, all of which from 2007. I call it the Karapar head because ultimately that's the set I was introduced to me on, but you might call it something else. And it's a really lovely set of pieces because here the color scheme is wonderful, but it also appears on the Karapar set, for which the name I derived, as well as it appears in a little system set. I'm using it currently right now to build a little Titan thing, don't worry about it. But it's a neat piece, it's a fascinating piece, and it's not even the only Baraki head to receive this recolor treatment. We also got the Takadox head, which poetically also came in this color scheme here as well, but also came in gunmetal in 2008 and white in 2007 in the same set this head was introduced on. Again, don't worry about it. What's interesting, though, is that this could have happened a third time. It should have happened a third time. There's one more Baraki head that is included in 2 different sets, and it is the Ehlek head. But unfortunately, it's introduced in the same color in both sets. This color right here. It appears in Ehlek, of course, but it also appears in the Karzani set. And while, yes, that set shares a color with this one being dark green and lime green, it actually does not have any other pieces in the set in this specific, near unique color combination here. These colors, of course, being yellow with a trans bright green sort of opaque plastic. It's actually a lovely plastic. It's nearly exclusive to this set with just the exception of a Vaki eye stalk. But what I find so fascinating about it is that it easily could have been recolored in the Karzani set in dark green or black or silver or really any other color you wanted there. And I think it would have looked better than what we ultimately got. But here's the thing. Is this a good set? I don't know. I like to think that Ehlek is a fine set. It's definitely not the first recommendation I would make from anything from 2007. In fact, it's probably lower on my list, but I don't think it's a bad set necessarily. However, is it a good set? Like, objectively, I have no way of actually giving you a definitive answer on that. I am not the arbiter of Bionicle decisions, no matter how much I like to pretend that I am. But ultimately, what I find so fascinating about the set is that it is unique. 2007 did something really refreshing in that all of the characters from canister sets that year were unique, not only from each other in the single wave, but even compared to the Baraki. So essentially, no Baraki was built alike, no Toamari was built alike, and no Toamari was built like a Baraki, etc., right? And I love that. I think that that goes a very long way towards making these sets feel special and ultimately making each one feel like an event when you're building it. Each one feels like you're almost building a little Titan. And that's lovely. They're definitely, I want to say they're the first wave of Bionicle sets, the first year of Bionicle sets to truly delve so deeply into this concept. And I think it makes sense because this was a year of sort of repetition builds in a way. Like, this was a year following up the now infamous Inika build, but at the time that build was still new, and this was the second year that that was being used. People were already complaining about it in 2007, and yet what I found so fascinating is that nobody really complained. I mean, people did complain, but not for the same reason, about the Toa Nuva recycling the Toa Mata build, or the Borak Kal recycling the Borak build. There, it was clear that those were often budgetary restraints, right? But in this case here, what LEGO was ultimately doing was still using parts that were widely available to them, but just combining them in different ways. And they had many years of Bionicle to work on by this point, so it made sense for them to do this. But that doesn't answer the question. Is Ehlek a good set? Here's the thing. I probably made it no secret that I'm not the world's biggest fan of Bionicle 2005. And 2005 Bionicle does do one thing interesting in that it is another year, like every other year previous to it, that had clone sets. And there are 2 different ways that I separate clones. Like, the Toa Mata are kind of clones of each other in that they're all very similar builds at the end of the day, but they have subtle differences between them. Even the Turaga or the Borak Va typically have subtle differences between them. But then when you look at something like the Rakshi or the Borak Cal or the Vaki. Those are all pure clones. Everything is completely identical in their builds, minus of course like their weapons and masks. And that makes them a little less fun to build, but like I get it. You gotta budget somewhere, right? And this is still reasonably early in Bionicle's run, so like are you going to make new pieces for the arms here too, or are you going to budget that and use that budget elsewhere? It makes sense. But by 2007, we started getting this change up where all of these sets were unique. 2005 still had this clone approach too, but it sort of flipped things a little bit in that instead of the heroes being non-clones, the villains were in the form of the Visorak sets. Now, I hold this piece up here because it's a little bit of a controversial piece. It is a highly specialized piece, and it's very large. In fact, one of the largest pieces to come out of Bionicle that is not a weapon. And I personally, if I had it my way, would separate this into two different pieces, but even ignoring that, because of this being such a large piece, it's sort of like a double-edged sword, right? In being so large, it's very specialized. It's really only used for like one thing, though it appears in a couple other sets as well. But outside of that, because it's so large, it gives you a very large canvas to sort of paint on, right? To design, to make each of these Visorak unique. And it goes a very long way towards making the Visorak feel unique, because this isn't a mask. It is a very large mask-like object. It is still the identifiable collectible thing for the Visorak, but the Visorak are also different in the length of their limbs, in the way that their shoulders connect to the body, because some of the shoulders are a longer socket or a shorter socket, and that I think goes a long way towards making those sets feel unique as well. Even more unique than most non-clone sets that came before them. So the Visorak do hold a special place in my heart, even if ultimately 2005 is not my favorite year of Bionicle. If you were then to take Ehlek, kidnap him from 2007 and plop him down 2005, is Ehlek a good set? No, I mean, I don't know. Here's the thing. No functions in this set, which obviously by 2007 was standard, but in 2005 would stand out like a sore thumb. But notably, this is built around just a single lift arm. Even from 2005 standards, very few pieces on this are new, like purely new. The feet, of course, per rocket feet 2006, so they would be new in 2005. And of course, these spines, which are sort of the highlight item in this set outside of that head, of course. But there's no functionality here. The launcher here is notoriously bad, but that's not really 2007's strong suit to begin with. And the fact that this body is built around a single lift arm, while it makes sense and sort of parallels the Takadoc set from 2007 as well, would really stand out in 2005. Save for the fact that this character has no armor on its limbs, which in 2007 almost felt like a feature in this set. It's definitely a bizarre choice, but it's clearly a budget choice, I think, as well. And while I do think it fits here, 2005, by the standards of that, yeah, the Vaki didn't have knee armor, but like this would feel pretty naked, I think. So yeah, this set is definitely a wild one. And yet, in 2007, it almost gets bumped up. Not because the set itself is good, but because the context that it exists within is more suited for this set. It's lifted up by the sets that exist around it. It's lifted up by the fact that it is different from the sets that exist around it. It makes it feel almost more unique, even though this build at the end of the day is a little more antiquated feeling at the end of the day than the other Baraki sets end up being. If I had my choice, I would probably modify it slightly, if only by taking this little spine piece right here and adding it to the arms either on the front or the back. On Mantax, they feel very forced on that set, but here they would make a lot more sense, especially given the fact that this set also has spines on its back. Why not also have these in dark green on the back of the arms as well and sort of round things out a little bit? But that's just me, right? Still though, an interesting set, and I'm definitely not the first person to like critique 2005 Bionicle, or really Bionicle's less exciting choices in general. As I've mentioned, Ehlek definitely the weakest of the Baraki sets, and for more reasons than one. But even outside of that, so many people have gone out of their way to criticize the Anika build, which in hindsight makes a lot of sense. It was around for like 4 years of Bionicle's run. Almost half of its lifespan was revolving around that build or a build of that type, and that gets annoying. Absolutely. The proportions, the Bionicle sets were getting wildly larger in size, the limbs getting longer and longer. And while I'm definitely someone who thinks that they don't need to be human proportions, because like they're not humans at the end end of the day, I can still understand that. I definitely had a big problem with how large the sets were getting, but even ignoring that for a moment, when I look at those sets, I can still appreciate what they were trying to do. Many people go out of their way and criticize 2009, specifically the Ehlek set, for using the same helmet piece that the Barracks set uses, but I actually quite adore that. And to me, it's somewhat reminiscent and even a bit of a nod to 2001 through 2003 Bionicle, where many of the sets wore the same masks. I see so few, if any, people criticizing the vehicle characters like Telleris or Perditus or Samad or the Spigot set, etc., wearing the same helmets as each other, right? But then going out of their way to criticize a car. And to me, I'm thinking, well, Lego probably designed a car's helmet and Barracks helmet around the same time, if not at the same time. So it makes sense they wear the same helmet. It works for both characters. It looks good in both colors. Like, I don't see what the problem is here, outside of the fact that it just limits exclusivity slightly. But like 2009 did have a lot going for it, in my opinion. Is that the thing I'm going to criticize, or am I going to criticize the fact that we're still getting Anika builds? You know, like, I think that's a little bit more of what I'm worried about. Ultimately, at the end of the day, there's a lot that we can learn by looking at the Bionicle sets that we adore and that we don't like, but not just the sets themselves, looking at them within the context that they exist in. It's not just about the fact that 2005 Bionicle is a little bit weak, in my personal opinion, but somebody else might adore it. It is the fact that it also existed specifically in that time, in that place, in space, right? It's not just that it's 2005 Bionicle, but it's that it's 2005. That me in 2005 is very different from me in 2025. And even if Bionicle was to come back today, it's not the same, because even if it was successful, it could very well be successful. It's still not going to be Bionicle, because Bionicle isn't just a toy. It is a product in time. It is lightning in a bottle, and that bottle is in the past. I definitely think that there is space for it out there on store shelves, but it would ultimately be a different thing, and not everybody can be satisfied 100%, and that's totally fine, which is where we come in. At the end of the day, we are who defines what Bionicle is. We define everything about what we enjoy in life, right? We sort of hold the IP, if you will. Yes, it's Legos, but we are the ones sort of steering its history these days, creating new characters, creating new builds, new parts, new aesthetics and locations and settings and new stories in these places, revamping and twisting old stories to fit a new narrative or a new universe, etc. The Bionicle fan base is alive and thriving, even if the product it's based upon is, 15 years demise. But there's nothing wrong with that, as these pieces still exist. People will learn to combine them in their own ways. But that is the important thing about this video, in their own ways. Before I end this video, what I wanted to say briefly is that I think the best aspect of Bionicle is the fact that you define it, but you should want to define it. I'm not saying that you can't go out of your way to take inspiration from other builders. In fact, I think you absolutely should, but you rob yourself of not only experience and a story and memories by doing that. If your identity is built around taking someone else's Bionicle designs and sort of passing them off as your own, or sort of hodgepodging other people's creations to create your own thing, I think you start to rob yourself of your own voice. In a lot of ways, I often talk about Bionicle and sort of learning how to build with it as a language. And in the same way, in the same parallel or metaphor, I also want to say that, like, stealing someone else's build, taking someone else's build, is tantamount, I guess, to plagiarism. But I don't mean it in the sense that it's the heavy implications that implies. More so the sense that by taking someone else's design without improving upon it, without learning why they approached that design the way they did, I don't know what you learn from it, right? I do think there is a lot to be learned from what other creators are doing out there. I've been tossing around the idea of talking about in a different video, sort of the Bionicle building meta and how it has evolved with time. How I tend to build in sort of a classic style, but that's just the design style that I choose, and that the meta, if you will, keeps evolving with time. I talk about the value of looking at Bionicle collaborations and contests like BioCup and so on, and how you can learn from the amount of time that other people have spent designing their builds for those collaborations and for those contests, because you're essentially taking the knowledge of hundreds of hours of work and filing that knowledge away to use at your own disposal, right? To learn new techniques and new tricks to maybe get past a hurdle you were stuck on in your own build. I have plenty of builds that have sat on the back burner because they're builds that I know how I want them to function up here, but actually realizing that function in hand is very different, right? However, I do think that if your entire identity in the Bionicle community is to take the builds of others to pass off as your own, ultimately, I don't know what you take from that. I don't know what you learn from that. You know what I mean? And in essence, I think that you can rob yourself of the experience of learning, because in fact, the experiences that I can recall the most from my Bionicle history, if you will, are entirely the builds that I've come up with. I have absolutely gone out of my way to try and figure out other people's builds, reverse engineer builds, and that's fun in its own right. There's a skill to that, in fact, and I think that there's value to that as well. Builds that have been sort of lost to time for various reasons. Having someone out there who can sort of reverse engineer and replicate those builds for the future. I mean, think there's an old Bionicle, I don't want to say Bionicle website, but there's a designer that used to work for, I think, Bionicle or Lego, named like Dan Lebkowitz or something like that. I'm trying to recall that off memory, so don't quote me if I'm wrong. Either way, though, it is an old website called like the Sands of Mananui or something along those lines. And it has a lot of really awesome looking 2001 specific Rahi on it. And I have no idea where that designer is today. If that website was off the internet, that media is lost entirely, right? So going back and trying to preserve those builds by reverse engineering them with the parts available is valuable. At the same time, though, when I look back and think to myself of the builds that I'm most proud of, it has always been building experiences of Mocs that I came up with. I've told an anecdote in several videos about one of my absolute favorite building sessions that I've ever had, which spanned nearly the course of 3 days. And this idea I just wanted to build one Rahi, one classic crab Rahi. And one of my favorite Rahi from all of Bionicle is the Ussel crab from 2003, the Puku and Takua set specifically, because that scuttle function is so neat, right? And I wanted to do something where I built my own crab, but with a scuttle, but more of like an accurate sideways scuttle. And I wanted it to be smaller because the Puku set is really cool, but it's also very large. And it's large because it needs to carry two 2003 Matoran on it, but I didn't want any of that. I just wanted a small crab that could scuttle. It didn't need to do anything else. And I went through several prototyping stages where I was messing with like camshafts and collision-based lift arm interactions and things like that. And it was never going to work the way I was approaching it until I found out like this novel interaction, sort of by accident, dropping a single piece out of a bin that I had on the floor and picking it up and saying, oh, this is a knob gear. Wait, what can I do with that knob gear? Because I needed these legs to be offset a specific amount, and the knob gear does. Anyway, point being, I ultimately ended up settling on this specific build that was designed around a very solid base. And I realized the potential with this base was not only useful for this crab build that I was making, but could be used for so many other things. And I was like, oh, I want to use this on like a centipede, but make it like modular so I can just keep stacking these leg builds together and then have it where it rolls along in the centipede scuttles. And I designed that. And as I was working on the head of that build, I had to insert these panels in a very specific angle. And one of the attempts that I tried to make to do that involved these angular connectors that I realized when I attached them to these panels a specific way, it sort of mimicked, or at least reminded me of, the movement of a hummingbird wing. So I literally went from building a crab, finishing that crab, building a centipede, finishing that centipede, and then building a hummingbird. And all of these were large builds, well over 100 pieces each. The centipede literally being a potentially infinite build since it's modular, but ignore that. And I would not have that memory if I never went about trying to design this myself in the first place. An idea of a function and an animal that made sense for that function had kicked off and kick-started this whole building session where I designed several different creatures, all because I wanted to do one thing specifically. And I think that's it has to be my favorite aspect of building, still to this day. Not even just that memory, but what spawns a memory like that. Sort of challenging your own expectations. I easily could have given up when my second prototype of the crab didn't work, but I moved on to a third one, scrapped all of the progress that I made. And I've done that plenty of times. I've run into plenty of issues with many of my builds. Some for better, some for worse, absolutely. And it's led to some builds I put a lot of time in going absolutely nowhere. But it doesn't mean that I got nothing out of it. I learned more of my own voice through that build, through those builds. And at the end of the day, I could not imagine robbing anybody else of that, I don't know what to call it, event, if nothing else, but of that memory, right? Potential memory. Anyway, don't want this video to get too heavy. Ultimately, it's just about going out of your way to discover your own voice, sort of interpret the context of your own work. And don't let anybody else tell you just because you designed something that it's bad. Because it's not up to them, right? It's up to you. I designed a Perditus mock that got a lot of flack because I changed his original color scheme. And I thought to myself, well, these people are nonsense, right? It's my choice what color this character is, and it's my choice who this character is. I don't need to base who this character is on their interpretation. Oh, it's the wrong color, so it needs to be somebody else. That's my choice to make. I'm the builder. I'm the person who's designing this character, the story that this character revolves around, and it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, because it's my character. It's my story. It's not to say you can't take criticism. You should, but you should also measure that criticism, and you should ask yourself: is this valid? Is this necessary? Is this valuable criticism, or is it just criticism based on, I don't like what you did here, you know? Anyway, that's it for this one. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe. It does help out the channel, of course, tremendously. Also, let me know your thoughts specifically in the comments. And what I would like to know, too, is particularly what is your favorite either callback to a character? Like, I like to think of, like, using the black the black Hydraxon mask on Von Nebula to sort of rectify one of the problems I have with 2007, in that there are no black masks from 2007 specifically. But also, I think that there are a lot of nods to previous Bionicle, especially in the way of like masks and stuff. I was recently thinking about like what the oldest Bionicle piece to be produced throughout its original run was, and like the Borak Eye is probably an obvious one because it's still produced to this day, but like this Air Katana piece here, one of the reasons I included it in the video, is one that, if I can recall correctly, was used in every single year of Bionicle G1 after it was introduced in 2002. It appears in 2003 all the way through 2009, if I recall correctly. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I really feel like I recognize it on all of those years. Point being, fascinating parts, fascinating history, fascinating context for which these parts exist in. Anyway, I'll see you on the next one. Take care.